And I was like, what? What do you mean? She said, well, if they gave you a reason, we would have that reason to fight against. But since they didn't give you a reason and just terminated your contract in accordance to the notice period in your contract, then we have nothing to fight against. Hey everyone, how's it going? I know it's been a while and you've all been waiting for this day, but welcome to another episode of How You're Getting Effed. I'm your host, Corgi Lumpur, and today we'll be talking about layoffs again. So a month and a half ago, I made a video that was prompted by Dyson and Samsung announcing layoffs in many parts of Asia, specifically in Singapore. There were a lot of layoffs that happened. And I talked about why it is that many companies like choosing places in Asia like Singapore for layoffs over other places like South Korea and Japan, as well as other countries in the West, such as Germany and the rest of the European Union. And I talked about my personal experience getting laid off in Germany, how that whole process worked, and also about how employees in South Korea get treated when they get laid off, which isn't really a layoff per se, but more of a here's some money that you can have if you take it and volunteer to leave. So there was a follow-up to that Dyson layoff situation. They announced layoffs on the 1st of October after telling everyone back in July that there weren't going to be any layoffs anytime soon. And that prompted a lot of people to be upset and start complaining. So of course, the lawmakers in Singapore were prompted to look into and investigate and monitor the situation surrounding the layoffs. And what did they find a week later in this article published by Singaporean media, CNA, Channel News Asia, on the 8th of October? Dyson did not break Singapore laws in layoffs. Well, of course they didn't. Did anyone expect any different for the country with almost no true rights for employees? But may have damaged its reputation, experts say. Dyson gave the union just 1 day's notice before it retrenched workers in its Singapore office. Now, if you've lived in this part of the world before, you should not be surprised. This is absolutely normal per local regional standards. There are employee laws in Singapore, but they don't really have any spine whatsoever for most people, aside from if you're really, really poorly paid or if you're really, really, really well paid. And that's something that I will talk about in this video, describing my experience getting laid off in Singapore. And you'll get to see the night and day of how it works in Germany and South Korea. And by the way, that video is down in the description below if you want to check it out, versus how spineless and toothless the employee laws are in Singapore. So before I begin the juicy part of this video, let me just give you a disclaimer over here that none of this is meant to be legal, financial, medical, or therapeutical advice. I am not a financial or legal advisor. If you do want financial and legal or employment related advice, you should consult an attorney where you live. So before we get into the juicy part of this video, I'd like to go over this article that I had read over the weekend, which was what prompted me to produce this video in the first place. This article is a great prelude into the content that I will get into, and I apologize for not making this video earlier. Again, YouTube is not my full-time job. I never intend to make YouTube my full-time job. It's just a hobby. I like telling the truth without any filter, and that's what this channel will stay as for the foreseeable future. So I apologize because it takes something like 5 to 8 hours on average to create a single video, and it is something that is very time consuming that I can't always dedicate myself to at all times of my life. So life happened in the past 1 month, and as a result, I never did any videos. So we'll get into the 3 paragraphs that are the most relevant over here in this article entitled "Goodbye to Big Tech's Big Perks? Singapore workers say global tech lash has come for their benefits," according to this article written by the Straits Times, a Singapore news media outlet. So the first paragraph over here is from Thomas, not his real name, 39, a former Meta employee laid off during the company's first round of cuts in November 2022, recalls how his team was disbanded overnight. My entire organization of about 30 engineers and 10 cross-functional staff were informed on that day that we were impacted. Is of course a nice corporate bullshit buzzword for you are fired. This next paragraph is from a lady who was apparently on a work visa and also in Meta who got laid off. And she talks about how she worried about getting laid off because she would only have 30 days to find a new job or get kicked out of the country. She says, having moved to Singapore in 2019, she recounts, I spent the entire night not knowing if I had 30 days to leave the country. In the morning, some of us got the email and some of us didn't, and there was no method to the madness. And the last paragraph that I'd like to read here, by the way, I'll probably go into this article in a dedicated video on its own, but I don't want to make this video too long or longer than it should be. This third paragraph over here is the most relevant to what we're about to talk about, where it goes, in the US, you have to give workers adequate heads up, which I don't think is completely true because there is the WARN Act for large-scale layoffs, but in theory, most US companies don't really have to give a big heads up in the first place. They can just give you your 2 weeks notice and you're gone like that. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. In Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, you must have negotiation periods. But in APAC, aka Asia Pacific, aka Southeast Asia, which Singapore is in, it's just, here it is. Take your gardening leave, please leave, this is your package, which is exactly how it played out for me as well when I got laid off few years ago in Singapore. So my story in Singapore goes like this. I was working for a company for a few years ago, and that company was of non-Singaporean origin, but they did have an office in Singapore, and I was working for them. And they were undergoing a new round of funding, which most people think that should be an indicator that you probably get a raise, right? But no, if a company gets a new round of funding, it is a good thing for the company, but not exactly a good thing for employees. And in most cases, it's usually a bad thing. And I'll talk about in detail why this is in another separate video because that's a longer topic. But they got a new round of funding, and what they decided to do, as companies that usually get new rounds of funding do, is start doing layoffs. So it happened to be that I was scheduled to go for a major surgery at the time, and I had told my then boss about said surgery and how I might be, on hospitalization leave, as they call it in Singapore, for anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, if not more. And that was a big mistake because I was subsequently randomly selected to get laid off just a few weeks after I told my boss. And how it went was they basically put me in a meeting with my boss, and HR was in there, and they said, hey man, we decided to end your employment. Here's your notice period. We're going to observe your notice period and pay you your salary during that time. But yeah, good luck. Bye. That's it. So needless to say, having done what I did in Germany, the first instinct that I had was to contact a lawyer. Now I knew if I'm growing up in this part of the world, Southeast Asia, generally doesn't have that much employee protection, particularly in Singapore, where the employee laws are mostly there to make it look nice for foreigners to see and say, hey, these guys have employment laws, isn't that great? But in reality, what those employment laws are toothless and spineless. So I went on Google Maps and looked up law firms dealing with employment and dismissals and found a few highly rated, 4.5 and above stars, ideally, law firms that dealt with employment, and I called them up, and I must have called like 4 or 5 of these different law firms because I don't really have a good idea of what a good law firm is in Singapore, and I didn't really know what my options were after, if that whole deal of getting me on a call and just laying me off right there at my notice period without any severance was legal or not. Right? So I just called them up, explained my situation. Here's how it went. I got laid off in a meeting. They told me I had my notice period, they would pay me, and I was gone. But also, just a few weeks before that, I had told my manager that I was about to go on long sick leave, or as they call hospitalization leave in Singapore. I'm not sure if that's entirely legal. Something like 3 or 4 of those firms, it happened some years ago, so I don't recall the exact number. 3 or 4 of those firms said, okay, we'll take down some notes over here and have someone call you back. No one called me back, ever. And I did follow up with some of those law firms as well as to, if they had, put a lawyer to my case, or if someone's going to call me back and tell me something, at least give me some information as to what my, options are. None of them did, despite the follow-up calls. Isn't that great? One of those companies did actually respond to me after 1 or 2 different follow-ups. I think it was a phone call at first, and then I had to do it by email. They told me to send over my employment contract and the dismissal letter, and they would set some time up with me to speak, but they will also charge me 200 Singaporean dollars, aka 150 USD or so, for an hour's worth of consultation at their office, which I ended up going to. And I'm going to tell you over here what the lawyer told me. So in the meantime, I also had a membership with NTUC, which is the company that runs Singapore's largest supermarket chain, FairPrice. And most people in Singapore, when they hear NTUC, they immediately think about the supermarket. But what the acronym stands for is National Trades Union Congress, which supposedly has some sort of union or arm that's supposed to help support employees and help stand up for their rights. So as part of this NTUC supermarket membership, they offer something that they describe on their website as protect your rights. Seek guidance on employment-related issues at the TADM at NTUC. TADM stands for Tripartite Alliance for Dispute Management, which is supposed to give mediation and advice for managing employment or payment-related disputes. So I also got in touch with this person whose title is Industry Relations Officer. And she had asked me to send over the employment contract as well as the termination letter. And she also gave a short description of what the timeline looks like over here, which I'll also share in this video. And the good thing about this was that it was covered under the supermarket membership fee, so there wasn't an additional charge. So the processes with the law firm and the NTUC legal advisor were ongoing at the same time, but I did get the law firm responding more quickly, and we had set up that appointment first, and then a couple of days later only did I have a phone call with the advisor from NTUC. So I went to the law firm first in downtown Singapore, where I was sat down with a lawyer who was probably in her 30s or even late 20s. She looked pretty young, but she had reviewed the documents that I had sent her, which were the employment contract and the termination letter, and she wanted me to tell her my story, and I did so. And by the end of it, she asked me, so your employer decided to let you go out of the blue? And I said yes. And she said, did they give you your notice period? And I said yes. And she said, did they say that they were going to pay you for the notice period? And I said yes. And she asked what the reason was for the layoff or termination of employment. And I said I didn't really know, because they didn't tell me in the meeting, nor was it stated in the termination letter that she had also read. And what she told me as a response was a complete shocker to me at the time, because I knew that employment laws were toothless and spineless, but I didn't know they were that toothless and spineless. Because what she told me was, because they were terminating you with notice that was in accordance to what was stated in your employment contract, and they were also going to pay you for said notice period, there's nothing that can be done, because they're just telling you that you're laid off. And I said, but they didn't give me any reason as to why they were laying me off. Shouldn't that have some sort of legal ground, for me to fight against? And on top of that, I was also, going for my surgery, which was a week out at that point, right? And she said, no, they don't have to give you a reason for termination, and they can just terminate your contract. And I was like, what? What do you mean? She said, well, if they gave you a reason, we would have that reason to fight against. But since they didn't give you a reason and just terminated your contract in accordance to the notice period in your contract, then we have nothing to fight against. Savvy? Does that make sense? Because it didn't make sense to me when I heard that the first time. According to her, if they gave you a reason as to why you're being let go, you can then take that reason and fight it in court. But because they didn't give you a reason, now there's nothing to fight against. And in order for her to have a case, they would have to not give me any reason and not observe the notice period. So basically telling you, you're fired, this is your last day, you'll be getting your salary up till this day and no more. She said that might give some sort of basis to fight them legally, but because they didn't have any reason, then that's it. And I asked her, so if I got this straight, there is no motivation like for companies to give you a reason. Why would anyone give you a reason if they could give you no reason and your notice period and just lay you off, right? If they give you a reason and your notice period, you might have something to fight against legally. If they just said, your notice period is a month and you're laid off as of today, we'll be paying you the next month. Bye. And no reason. Why wouldn't anyone just use that instead of giving a fucking reason as to why a person is laid off? If they don't have any reason, they can't fight against the company as long as the company is paying them for that notice period. That is how fucked up the employment laws in Singapore are. The employment laws, in my opinion, just exist as a nice piece of decoration for outsiders to look in and say, oh, Singapore does have employment laws. Yeah, the employees must be protected. Yeah, okay. If we don't dig deeper, we're not going to find out. So, I mean, it should be good for the employees, right? And then they start wondering like, and why do companies like doing layoffs in Singapore as opposed to the European Union or even South Korea and Japan? Isn't that great? Isn't that amazing? Isn't that the most fucked up piece of shit that you've heard all day, maybe all week, or maybe even all year? Aside from maybe Donald Trump's victory, if you're one of those people, that might take the cake, right? So we're going to talk about what the NTUC person said, which I will just briefly describe as pretty much the same thing as what the law firm told me. She said, well, the company gave you your notice period. They didn't give you any reason, but you don't have any reason now to fight them in court because you don't have any reason. And I actually, let's rewind just a second to the law firm because I missed out this one question that I asked her. If there was any way that I could challenge them in court because of the whole telling them that I was going off for surgery, I will be out of office on medical leave for some period of time. And she asked me how much I made, which was at the time 130,000 Singaporean dollars base salary per year, 100,000 USD. And she said, well, if your salary isn't at least, quote unquote, 300 to 400K, it isn't worth it for you to fight them in court. You already were laid off legally, and it wouldn't be worth it unless your salary was that high to proceed further with your case. So not only do you not get protected by the laws that are supposed to protect you in name, you also get to protect yourself, but you end up in a net loss position if you're 99% of the working people. $300,000 to $400,000, as far as I know, in Singapore, is a top 1% salary. You can look it up on the income tax website. I think it actually tells you like this is like the top X% of income makers, right? So if you're not in the top 1% or 2%, if my number is wrong, of income earners in Singapore, it is financially not worth it to even defend yourself, according to this lawyer that I saw. So I left her office $200 short, and I wasn't happy about it, but I wasn't made any happier when that NTUC person called me up a couple of days later, because she told me the exact same thing. She had the exact same questions, more or less, and she was very friendly, very helpful, right? And I do have a level of respect for her. I think she was very professional and sympathetic, right? And I told her about this whole situation as well. And she was like, yeah, like, I'd love to help you out, but unfortunately, there isn't much we can do from a legal standpoint. So there you have it. That's my story of how I got laid off in Singapore. And this, keep in mind, this is a medium-sized firm, right? So they don't really have a reputation to damage for most part. So a lot of people in Singapore like working for a large company, like these big tech companies in the article that I talked about earlier in this video. They like to work in big brand companies, ideally of non-Singapore origin, ideally of Western origin. That means either a European or American company, right, operating in Singapore, because those companies are afraid of losing their face or whatever it is, and they will give you your notice at the last minute, like what some of these people in the Dyson article described, but at least they're going to give you a good severance package. I wasn't given any severance package to begin with. That medium-sized company didn't offer me any severance whatsoever. The only payment that I got was for the notice period. I didn't have to work after that meeting with my manager and HR, but there wasn't anything extra on top of this. Now, I did speak to some higher ups in that company, right? Specifically 2 VPs that I knew pretty well. Those were the same 2 guys who hired me into the company to begin with, and they had heard about this fucked up situation, and they were questioning, like, why is this new person, this new director, or whatever her title was, laying people off, and why are they laying this guy off? Because he's a great guy, he's a top performer at the company. And they were trying to wrap their heads around the whole situation as well. And one of them got so angry that he even went to HR and said, like, what the hell is the meaning of this? And even as a VP in the company, that's the second highest level of job, down from the CEO and the founder, didn't manage to do much. He didn't manage to get me any sort of severance. I think his reaction to HR and also speaking to my then manager directly about the situation did help, because HR ultimately did reach out to me and say, hey, we'll extend your notice period by a couple of months so that your health insurance remains valid, but we will not be paying you for those extra months. And that was the best that he could do as a VP, right? Imagine the average person working in an average company of maybe small to medium size in Singapore and many parts of Southeast Asia as well, right? Including Indonesia, Malaysia, and possibly Thailand. I'm not that familiar about Thailand, but you know, this region of the world is not really known for laws that protect employees. Imagine those people getting laid off, and they're not maybe as connected within the company to approach someone higher up to try to fight for them. They just get laid off with their notice period, no additional pay. And the notice periods are really, really short in this part of the world as well. So when I was in Germany, three months was a standard notice period for even a lot of entry-level folks that I've worked with and know of. And 6 months is not really abnormal as well for middle management and higher. In Singapore, it's usually a month for most companies, maybe 2 months in some cases. 3 months is considered a senior level notice period, and Anything more is I've never heard of it. So leave a comment down in the description if you've heard of a notice period that was 3 months or longer within any Southeast Asian country. Yeah, that's how fucked up it is. And people wonder why companies like doing layoffs in countries like Singapore and APAC, Asia Pacific. It's because of this. Employees don't have many rights, and the laws that exist to protect them aren't really there to protect them. Because even though you might be right, like in my example, might not be worth it financially. You will be at a net loss paying out your legal fees versus what you get for being right. And the other problem about this is because not enough people talk about this. They're too afraid of losing their reputation or whatever the fuck it is that they're worried about by telling it to even their family or friends. I'm not even asking you to go onto YouTube or TikTok and get a viral video out there, right? Although I do encourage it, because that's exactly how you stop this kind of thing, or at least, get people to actually pass laws and lawmakers to actually step it up instead of monitoring and observing and investigating and then figuring out that, oh, there's actually nothing wrong that they did by the legal system. There's nothing wrong that they did. It's totally fine. Right? The way to actually get lawmakers' attention and the attention of other people is by telling this to everyone that you know. If you got laid off, tell it to people. Laid off inappropriately, like tell them about how shitty your layoff was, right? I know people in Singapore, right, from places like Shopify, for example, who didn't even know that they were getting laid off until they logged onto their computer one morning and realized that they couldn't log in. And then they check their personal email, and then they get an email that says, oh, you're laid off, right? That's how it works. And that's how little awareness is on how badly screwed over employees are in Asia, because I knew those people on a really close basis. That's why they told me, but they're not going out telling their family or friends and even ex-colleagues that they were treated in such an inhumane, fucked up manner, because they're afraid of being that person who's gotten laid off before. Oh my God, it's so bad. I better not tell anyone that I got laid off, right? I better not tell anyone that I didn't get any severance. I better not tell people about getting laid off because they might call me too negative. That's your problem. That's the problem that you propagate when you don't spread the word. Because no one spreads the word, no one gets to find out. Because no one gets to find out, nothing happens. Because nothing happens, no angry reactions, no viral posts on social media, no one gives a shit. And the cycle keeps on going. The cycle keeps propagating itself. And a lot of people want that cycle to stop because there's no guarantee at the new job, at the next job that they find, or the one after that they won't get laid off, especially in these times where we've basically been in an economic bubble or in a recession, as some people would say, right, for the last 3 years. The layoffs are going to be more commonplace, and these things are just going to keep going. And that cycle, right, as much as you wished it stopped, isn't going to stop, and people aren't going to get treated more fairly if you don't kick up a stink. It's because of your silence that they keep on doing it. Think about it. That's it for today, and I hope you learned something. See y'all in the next video. Goodbye.